Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. We're here every week on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute. One of the joys we have at the Grassroot Institute as we promote the values of individual liberty and free markets and limited accountable government is to see a new generation embracing these values and taking them into the future for America. There's one group that I'm particularly proud to be associated with at the University of Hawaii. That's the Young Americans for Liberty. Just bright young men and women who are not afraid to stand up for what they believe in. But more than that, they're reflective. They think about what they believe in and they make choices in terms of values that they want to stand for. In addition to that, they're trying to promote the very ideas that make a republic great. And today I've really got a wonderful privilege. We usually interview movers and shakers and leaders in society. Today we're interviewing future movers and shakers and leaders in society. Two friends from Young Americans for Liberty at the University of Hawaii. First, president of the chapter at Young Americans for Liberty, Sean Mitsui. Aloha, Sean.
Thank you very much for having us on our show.
Glad you're on the program. And the secretary of the chapter, Clarke Velasco. Aloha.
Hey, glad to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to spend this time with you. You know, I've enjoyed coming and visiting the group, and just a great job that you're doing. I want to congratulate you.
Thank you very
Sean,
much.
Can you tell us a little bit about the movement? It's a national, in fact, an international movement, Young Americans for Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
Let our viewers know a bit more about it.
So Young Americans for Liberty is a national political activist group dedicated to conservative libertarian principles. We currently have over 600 chapters nationwide, and we're dedicated to the ideas of a small, limited, accountable government, individual freedoms, and free market economics.
Well, let me ask you this question. You said you're dedicated to libertarian values. Does that mean you're politically the party of the libertarians, or does that mean that you are using the word libertarian in more of an ideas sense?
More of an ideas sense. More generally, I mean, like for me, libertarianism is about you basically owe your life to yourself, meaning that there isn't that any higher power that you should be accountable towards. You basically, nobody owes your life.
And by higher power, you're not referring to anything metaphysical. You're talking about the government.
The government, yes. That's what I was going for.
Well, that's something. You know, Clarke, you're also involved in this. How did you get involved in the chapter at the University of Hawaii, Clarke?
Well, going into college, you're young, impressionable, still am.
Don't ever lose it. Don't ever lose it.
Yeah, I was looking around, trying to find groups that I could align myself with, or expand my horizons. And Young Americans for Liberty pretty much just fit perfectly. It's accountability towards yourself, making sure that nobody can tell you what to do, and more importantly, that any cooperation with any other people is completely voluntary.
Well, both of you have already started to mention the ideas that drew you to the group. You didn't say it was the drinking, it was the partying, it was the girls, it was the social life or anything. You both are basically saying, I care about being able to have individual liberty. I care about being able to run my own life without the government controlling it and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about some of those ideas, a little more. What is this concept of liberty, Sean? Is it anarchy, that you are the protesters of everything, that you're telling the government to pack up and go to Siberia? Is that what it's all about? What is this concept really about?
Well, for me personally, I don't believe in anarchy. I think there is some room for government to be involved, but I just think that if government, as long as government is big to the extent that it is currently, it basically has the ability to tell you what to do. Government is, we basically see it as an entity that uses force to coerce things on other people.
Well, so that's very well said then, because right at the outset, you're not saying that we should not have any government at all.
Right.
You're talking about limiting government from the kind of coercion that being very big and powerful can bring about. Well, that's a very tough balance, but I'm glad you clarified this, because a lot of times people may characterize libertarians as people who are anti-government. Clarke, do you see a positive role that government could play if it's held accountable?
And yes, part of the big reason libertarians like limited government is that it becomes streamlined. Like without the bureaucracy, without the paperwork, without all the red tape to cut through, the regulations could be a lot more well-stomached. People are talking about like the welfare state not being such a good thing. Some alternative ideas include like a universal basic income that people like to talk about, which is people are responsible for spending money the way they like. So, stuff like that.
So you've already both thought through some policy implications of libertarian thought, how government would operate better, how people would have more liberty if we had these various policies.
Mm-hmm.
But let's back up before we get into the policy realm and talk a little bit about the source of these ideas. Where do these ideas come from, basically? Are these truly American ideas, or are these, is this some kind of foreign doctrine that you're bringing in? Go ahead, Sean.
Well, I always ask my question, that particular question to myself all the time, and I don't think it's innately an American idea. I think it's a very human idea for us to not be ruled by someone else. Of course, a lot of our ideas can be grounded upon the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. We fought the war against the British, and because we essentially thought that that there isn't a fair representation of what we have to say, and they're basically abusing their power, collecting taxes and forcing whatever kind of authority they want upon us.
Now, this idea that we don't want to be ruled by someone else, we don't want to be controlled by some force outside of ourselves. What do you say if someone says, that's merely selfish, that you really need to have some sense of responsibility to other people in society? All you want to do is to have total freedom from any responsibility. Would that be a fair characterization of your position? How might you respond, Clarke, to somebody who says that to you?
That's a fair perspective if you have a certain understanding of our position. But yes, we do want that complete and utter freedom. But the freedom to do whatever we want is also the freedom to volunteer, to help, and to cooperate with others.
Sure.
Like of our own choosing without being mandated to do so.
Is there a limit to the freedom that we talk about? Is there anything that restrains us from certain actions and behaviors? Or are we really saying what we want to do is anything and everything we want to do that our impulses lead us to?
Well, there are varying degrees in terms of discussion, even amongst libertarian thought. But essentially, as long as you don't other people's rights.
Other people's rights.
Right, life, liberty, and property.
Oh, in other words, this is not about my rights alone. It's not about me being totally free from any responsibility. There's a limit, and that limit is, as you've articulated, other people's rights. So libertarians not only promote liberty for themselves, would you say they promote liberty for other people as well, and they defend that from being taken away?
Yes, it's not just us as individuals, it's the right of the individual. That's really important to us.
Well, I'm glad you say this, because I think that helps to dispel one of the misconceptions, that libertarianism is a one-way street. Rather, it's something that respects the liberty of others and fosters that liberty. Is that one of the goals of your society, the Young Americans for Liberty, to foster individual liberty amongst all people?
Certainly. I mean, I think for me, for myself, I see it also as a moral argument. You have to be responsible for yourself. I mean, you can't always, go up to the government and asking more from it, because essentially government doesn't make its own money. It's basically collecting money from other people, and there are going to be like unintended consequences for any kind of policy that they administer.
So rather than having government be the nanny or the church or some external agent telling people what to do, individuals, to exercise proper liberty and responsibility, need to learn restraint themselves. You're not, you're in favor of restraint when it comes from within the individual then?
Of course. I think a lot of times when we talk about free market ideals, capitalism, people tend to think that we're not for any kind of regulation. We are. We're for regulation that, that's innate, that's self-governing.
Well, let's take a look at our society we live in now, the United States of America, and even Hawaii in particular. How well are we doing as a society under government here in our state in terms of honoring the individual liberty of individuals or promoting the individual liberty? Sean?
I think there's a lot of room for improvement. When you look at the homelessness issue, I think we tend to just try to ignore the issue by saying that, these homeless people, they got to just basically we have to just basically reallocate towards somewhere else without really being
mean
mindful.
move them around?
Right, move them around. We're just basically ignoring the issue. That's how I see it, without properly addressing the root of the problem itself.
And what is that root, the root of the problem with respect to homelessness?
I mean, no doubt it is a really, really difficult problem to solve, but we basically have to, you know, if it is like finding a job for them, looking for a place for them to be able to, you know, to live, you know, basically able to help them live their own lives. I think those are the kind of things that we have to address, not basically moving them around.
Okay, so rather than just taking care of them or shepherding them
Right.
or moving them to another place or giving them food, clothing, and so forth, you are promoting a society that would inculcate individual responsibility, hard work, self-determination, and so forth. How about you, Clarke? Are there any other areas in our society today that indicate we don't have the levels of liberty that we need to have?
I mean, the homelessness issue is a good one, but so far as I'm aware, just a lot of, I wouldn't want to say dissatisfaction, but I would say like unrest with the whole rail issue, how we're handling that, just use of state money to pay pensions for people who have been, you know, been passed away for a very long time. When you see stuff like that hit the news, it seems kind of disconcerting. And
Because that money belongs to other people.
Yeah.
So you're talking about money being taken against the will from the general citizenry and being used inefficiently and wastefully and even fraudulently, perhaps. So that's a very unlibertarian thing to do.
it's a very immoral thing to do, I think.
You know, I noticed that both of you have used the word morality and immoral. And very often people think of that as being something to do with religion. Because religions do have morality, whether they're Buddhism or Christianity and so forth. This idea of morality, I'm also intrigued that you as young men are talking about morality now. College students, if people say, what are college students talking about nowadays? What do they stand for? You don't hear a lot of people say they're standing up for morality. So if I could ask you, Sean, well, you know, what do you consider to be moral? What do you consider to even to be a basis for being moral?
Well, when talking about morality, I mean, it can be a really difficult topic to talk about. But I think for all of us, when we talk about morality, the idea of it is that we don't want other people to, harm us or disrupt us in any way, if we don't like it. I think that's like one place to start off when we talk about morality.
In other words, if we don't want other people to do something to us, we should not do it to
Right.
them. If we don't accept certain kinds of behavior as being appropriate toward us, we should limit ourselves and not treat other people in that way. Well, I know a couple of very, very old people who said something like that. One was Confucius, and then the other one was Jesus.
It's true.
Do not do to other people what you wouldn't want them to do to you. And Clarke, in your sense, why do you call the values that you've identified of individual liberty and free markets and limited government, why do you say that they're moral?
Maybe I'm just a little old school. I like to go with the golden rule that you guys just mentioned. Honestly, that's just a simple and good framework to go from my perspective and from the perspective of any other person.
Well, that's wonderful. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back from this break, I'd be very interested in knowing what your perceptions are of other millennials, especially at the university now, and their ideals, their cultural values, as well as what they think politically. This is Keli'i Aquino with a fascinating discussion with two young men from the University of Hawaii, students there who are part of the Young Americans for Liberty program, Sean Mitsui, and I'd like to correct my first introduction of Clarke. It's Clarke Velasco, and I'm going to be back with them, but I think you'll find what they have to say fascinating. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this short message.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world. And we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Hi, my name is Cindy Matsuki, and I host the show High Growth with HTDC on ThinkTech Hawaii. This is the show where we talk about all things tech, innovation, entrepreneurship, and manufacturing, because there's so many things going on in Hawaii and more people should know about them. So this is the program that you can come and find out about all the things happening in Hawaii. And this show also airs on Olelo 54 along with ThinkTech Hawaii. And it broadcasts live every other Tuesday at 3 p.m. So don't forget, check out the show Tuesday, 3 p.m. every other week. High Growth with HTDC. Thanks.
Welcome back to our second segment today of Ehana Kako. We're here every week at the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network, and I want to take my hat off to Jay Fidel, the producer, as well as all the wonderful staff and volunteers who make possible over 35 hours of original content from Honolulu emanating from these studios, going live across the world and then replayed multiple times. All of you out there are a great, great audience, and I thank you. At the Grassroots Institute, we like to emulate an ancient saying in Hawaii. In Hawaii, we say, e pule kako, let us pray together. So at the Grassroots Institute, we also say, e hana kako, which means let's work together. Think of how much better the world would be if we worked together rather than against each other, especially for a society that has a better economy, government, and educational system for all, as well as many other values. I'm delighted to return to our conversation now with Clarke Velasco and Sean Mitsui. Clarke is secretary and Sean is president of the Young Americans for Liberty at the University of Hawaii. Well, let's start talking about other students. You are at a public university campus. There's about what, 60,000 students, Sean, or so in the system?
14,000 undergraduate students.
14, and undergraduates themselves, like
Well,
yourself,
combined with
about 14 on your campus.
Yes.
I was using the system-wide figures.
Oh, okay.
But
Not sure about that
that's a
figure.
lot of undergraduates to be in that campus on Manoa. What would you say are your observations of the interests of others in terms of these kinds of philosophical ideas that you're espousing? Are students philosophically oriented in terms of thinking through morality and liberty and so forth in general? Is this the kind of conversation you have when you sit down with somebody at the lunchroom?
I think a lot of students are really conscientious, especially now. I mean, a lot of students are a little more critical as to what the government does. I do find a lot of commonalities in terms of a lot of social issues when it comes to like police brutality and henceforth.
All right.
But I often do find myself having a hard time, finding common ground when it comes to like economic issues.
Well, that's interesting. There's a difference there. What are some of those differences in the opinions of most of the students about economics? Clarke?
Well, a lot of them seem to praise the Scandinavian model of economics, which is a lot of high social regulation. Some of them have gone so far as to claim it's a socialist model. But it was pretty interesting. I read an article recently where the head of state of Denmark actually called out that line of thought, saying, sure, we may be high regulation, but we are not socialists. We couldn't espouse the free market any more than we could.
Do you mean by socialist that the government plays a very big role in making sure that benefits are given to people and does so by taxing other people, and it's largely the government that is looked to provide education, social welfare, benefits, and that type of thing? You mean that type of economic role for the government?
Very much so.
And so, is that right, Sean? Do you also find that most students are more in favor of that kind of role for government, a bigger government that provides bigger benefits?
I hope that's not the reality, but unfortunately that does seem to be the case.
There was recently a movement, and let me ask you about this, across the country where students protested on their campus and shouted out in the protest basically that they should have all of their student loans forgiven, that they should not have to pay back their student loans, that it should be their right to get a college education, and whatever student loans they have should be wiped off and they should be forgiven them as their right. Well, did you hear about this movement?
I did.
And what are your thoughts about this movement?
Well, I mean, forgiving student loans is just a temporary solution. What's going to go on beyond that? There isn't going to be a good sense of accountability. Colleges are going to be able to essentially increase their tuition as much as they want because it's basically a guaranteed source of income that they're going to be able to get from the government. Someone's going to have to pay for it.
So they want the government to. Yeah, and that's the question, Clarke. Who is supposed to pay for this if they have their tuition loans wiped out? Does the debt just disappear? Or does somebody end up paying for them?
See, that's the thing when we're talking about having free college. The term free, it's a bit loaded because the burden eventually falls onto pretty much every single taxpayer. And one of the bigger things that they try to talk about is that we shouldn't have to. And, you kind of appreciate where they're coming from, but the methodology is a bit...
Well, there seems to be a disconnect. On one hand, then, there's this call for the right to have free college, but somebody has to pay for it. So what really they must be saying is that as long as we don't have to pay for it, we'll be fine.
And we're all fine somehow.
And then other people will have to pay for it. Isn't that like what Milton Friedman said when he gave that very famous little phrase, "There ain't no such thing as a free lunch"? Why do you think that students in general then, especially those who are calling to have their student loans wiped out, why do you think they're not conscious that there ain't no such thing as a free lunch? Why do you think they're not conscious that in the end, they as taxpayers are ultimately going to pay, or at least somebody else in the short term is going to pay?
I think everyone does realize that there is no such thing as a free lunch, but it's really hard to realize to what extent of that is true when you haven't like really worked and started paying taxes yet. There is like a problem when you say that you want free college tuition, but you also want to expand Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, when all of those things make a bulk of our federal government's budget as of now. You got to get that money somewhere, and it's going to be a huge cost.
There's also a lot of political talk going on now because we're in the midst of a presidential campaign and the primaries are running candidates, and we see from national media and so forth. Do people talk about this or take sides on campus, Clarke?
Very much so. There's a certain candidate, his name is Bernie Sanders, and there's a pretty big movement on campus, Oahu Students for Bernie Sanders, that is very rambunctious towards...
rambunctious?
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, tell me what you mean by that.
Well, a lot of the movements is kind of nationwide of students who do support Bernie Sanders, start protesting, start organizing marches and stuff like that.
Well, this is interesting, this political activism. And what is your concern about support for a candidate, for Bernie Sanders in particular? What is that of concern to you?
Well, see, the thing is, on social issues, we may agree. Like Sean said, police brutality, certain forms of accountability, but when we're talking about a $15 minimum wage, when we're talking about completely free college, when it comes to taxing the 1%, as it were, a lot of people hear what he's trying to say, but don't do too much in-depth research as to what the implications of those things would be.
So, Sean, this is kind of like what we were talking about earlier, the ain't no such thing as a free lunch. So you're mentioning Bernie Sanders as being a candidate who's attractive because he articulates the free lunch that students could get.
No.
But the full economic thought hasn't been put into it. Have you had dialogues with other students about this? Have you tried to talk about the economics of this?
Of course, I think a lot of times, people do try to be conscientious of the economic arguments, but they really don't dig in deeper about some of the unintended consequences. I think a lot of times we tend to think that everything is, ceteris paribus, all things held constant. If you say that, we're just gonna suck up all the money from the defense budget and reallocate it towards, education, then we're gonna be able to pay it off. That's not true. Cost is gonna go up. More students are gonna be enrolled into college, and they might not necessarily get, actually meaningful degrees. So there is a moral argument as well.
Now, I know all students, including yourselves, are concerned about the cost of living, renting a place, or how much you need to work in order to pay for even tuition and other things and so forth. And your organization has tried to look at some of the causes and recently held a seminar at the Campus Center Ballroom on one of the causes of the cost of living going up in Hawaii, and that is a 1920 shipping law called the Jones Act. Tell me how that went. First of all, how did you manage to package this concept and make it appealing to college students?
So we had the great opportunity to work with Senator Sam Slum's office when planning this forum, and I mean, I think it's an issue that a lot of us really do care about, but unfortunately, not many people actually know about the Jones Act and how it affects the cost of living here in Hawaii.
They don't know about it, you mean?
Right, they don't really know about it.
So what happens when you try to have conversations about it? Is it easy to educate people about the fact that this shipping law has given us such a scarcity of ships in America now that drives up the cost of shipping and affects our living?
You just have to...
Is it easy or hard to?
It's relatively easy. I mean, you just have to get their attention. You have to. When we table at Campus Center, we ask them like, how do you guys feel about the cost of living? And a lot of people are like, oh, it's terrible. It's so expensive. There you go. You got their attention, and now you have to just talk about what the Jones Act is, and they say, oh wow. I mean, I never really knew about this law.
Oh, so once you get the conversation going, you can reason. Have you experienced that, Clarke?
Yes, I actually recently had a conversation with a potential member who was she seemed pretty well versed in counterpoints to our arguments. One of them was the issue with free college not really being free, which is our point. And she said, well, it's really just going to be $33 added to however much you're going to be taxed. I don't know where she got that figure, but she seemed to be very confident in it. So one of the bigger things that I find, instead of just talking about the issues, is talking about the reasoning behind why we stand where we stand. And from the point of accountability, from the point of everybody having the ability to have upward mobility, she seemed to agree with us.
How do you compare yourselves to other young millennials who are involved in various forms of activism? Here in the state of Hawaii, we have a movement of young Native Hawaiians who are asserting rights as well as a view of history and proposing a transition in government, perhaps an independent state for Hawaiians and so forth. They're engaged in many issues, including protesting the building of the telescope on Mauna Kea. Have you come across these activists in college? And how would you compare them to the Young Americans for Liberty?
Are you, Clarke?
I've seen them on campus, but they are, contrary to what I think some media portrayals of them are, they're very peaceful. They're loud, but what they have to say is there's quality to it, and it's something that I think everyone should listen to.
Are young millennials politically interested for the most part, or are most of them just trying to get through school and get onto their jobs?
For the most part, I think there does seem to be some disconnect politically, but I at the same time I do find a lot of people who are actually interested in the issues that occur today. So that's something that I'm really grateful for, at least to get the discussion rolling.
Well, good. Well, I look forward to hearing more from you when we come back from a short break. We'll be right back after this short message, so don't go away for our conclusion to today's episode with students from the Young Americans for Liberty.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel. I'm host of Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, which is our flagship show, which plays 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. And the supporters of that show are Hawaii Energy Policy Forum and Hawaii Energy. And luckily enough, we have representatives of both of them right here today to tell you more about what they think about the show. Sharon Moriwaki at my left is co-chair of Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, and she goes first. Sharon?
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. I'm so glad that we have this Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. This was 2 years ago when we started this, and we have continued it because it's so important, and there's so many developments happening across the state. And we hope you'll tune in every Wednesday, 4 to 5. It's wonderful.
And Ray is Hawaii Energy. Ray, what is your thought about the same subject?
Well, I agree completely with Sharon that we are talking about every Wednesday, 4 to 5. We talk about some of the most important subjects that are affecting the islands now and into the future. Energy, clean energy, we need it. We often run into new ideas that we had not thought about before. We did just today, and I think we're going to have more of that in the future. So come on down and watch us 4 to 5 on Wednesdays, and we'll see what happens.
We'll see you then. Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back to Ehana Kako. I'm here with a couple of students from the Young Americans for Liberty at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Sean Mitsui, president of the chapter, Clarke Velasco, who's the secretary of the chapter, and they're both very busy and active in promoting ideas which matter in the long run, and trying to accomplish some goals for their organization as well. Sean, as president of the group, and Clarke as secretary, you're actively involved in trying to recruit other students to get involved. What are some of your goals, and how are you going about that?
I think for the goal or the purpose of our organization is to at least provide an alternative perspective. Oftentimes people say that Hawaii is a very largely blue state, and it is. There's a predominant argument or a one-sided argument towards any issue, and we just want to provide that alternative perspective, which is grounded more on free market, individual liberty perspective.
By blue state, you don't mean the ocean. You mean that Hawaii is currently run by one political party for the most part,
Essentially.
and the Democrats and the Republicans are so narrowly represented, and any other party is not represented, so that we really don't have that competition between parties. So it's not that, is it that you're anti-Democrat, or that you're promoting, or you actually are promoting healthy competition?
Yeah, we just want to promote a healthy competition. I'm not anti-whatever. I think we just want to be able to get that discussion rolling. I'm always willing to correct myself if anybody is able to prove that some of my ideas are wrong. And free speech is something that we should all be for.
And the Young Americans for Liberty is open to people of all parties, political parties. It's not a one partisan group, is that right?
Any and every. We actually have a chart that we use when we table to gather more members. In case anyone is curious, we try to figure out where they fall in a chart.
Oh, that's great.
Whether or not they lean fiscally or economically liberal or conservative. But regardless of the answer, it's not, oh, you have to be a libertarian to join. It's more like, now that you're aware, why don't we exchange ideas?
That's right. In fact, by using this chart, students can actually answer questions that help diagnose what their ideology is.
Not that ideology is an illness or anything.
That's right. But that it's something that goes beyond or is not the same as political parties. So you're not asking them questions that determine whether they're Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or Independent or Green Party and so forth. You're asking them questions. Let's talk a little bit about it. Like, what are some of the fundamental values that you're asking about to help determine what you are and what you believe?
Well, honestly, the questions aren't so much as whether or not exactly Republican, Green, Democrat, or
right.
And Independent. It's just what
it's
you
think.
think.
It's not about the label.
It's what you think and where you fall on these issues.
That's right.
And I haven't exactly memorized the questions themselves, but they help you gauge your thoughts on an issue, like a yes, no, or a scale. Like,
sure.
Say, how do you feel about freedom of speech? Should the government be doing this? Should you be allowed to do this? And if so, by whom? And by asking those questions, we can gauge where a person, somewhat gauge where a person would lie on the political spectrum.
Sean, what are some of the ways the group reaches out and informs others of what you believe and invites others to participate?
Well, we have a tabling session every other Friday.
Okay, a tabling session. You're out on a table, right?
Yes. So we do try to have fun activities from now and then, including the political chart that Clarke just talked about. We also have like a huge Jenga piece to talk about an economic idea. And we also have meetings every other Thursday when we don't have tabling sessions.
When are your meetings on Thursday? At what time?
every other Thursday, 5:30 to 6:30. And
5:30, 6:30.
And typically, we like to invite guest speakers like yourself
Yeah.
to educate our members, especially our newer ones, on what we believe in.
Well, when I come, I get educated. Did you notice last time I was there, I asked more questions
Oh.
than students because it's fascinating, and so many of the students are quite engaged in the ideas, which is important. As we move forward in society, are your students, your fellow students, interested in getting involved in the political process at all, running for office perhaps? Is that something that you do, or do you primarily support political candidates?
In terms of our members, I think some of them do have political ambitions. I'm personally, I don't have any political ambitions at this point. I'm more of a business major, but yeah, I mean, there are some people who are who do have that political mindset and who do see a future for themselves in that area.
How about you, Clarke? You want to run for president of the United States?
I'm not sure about president, but
Maybe vice president.
Let's settle there.
no, but in terms of like at the very least getting our voices heard, we do have members who do. And in fact, I think I spent the night of my 21st birthday with who is she? Our marketing executive, our public relations executive, testifying before the legislation on a certain bill. I don't even remember, but we do want to have our voices heard.
Well, that's great. You know, one of the things I picked up in talking with your group is that there are some very solid economic issues that you're concerned about, and invariably you talk a lot about the free market. Sean, you're an economist in the making right now. You're an econ major, is that right?
Finance major.
Finance major. Okay, so you have to know something about economics.
Yes.
But finance, even better. When you're trying to explain to a fellow student what the free market is, what do you say? Because anything could come to mind. I found that there's students who immediately think we're talking about the swap meet. What is the free market, and why is that an important concept for the ideas that you espouse?
Well, it is a competitive system where people are able to aspire to do bigger and better things. I mean, if some people want to be able to establish a company, some people just want to work for a company. It's whatever you want to make out of it. I see that as being the free market system, and it's a self-regulating system where where we do have a good sense of accountability in place.
When you say self-regulating, you're talking about the marketplace where there are competitors, there's supply and demand.
Right.
And the market itself determines the distribution of things, the production, as well as the pricing.
Yes.
In contrast to, as you were talking about earlier, government controlling everything. So is that the big conflict then for the free market, the issue of government control?
I think a lot of people do tend to misunderstand when we talk about free market economics, especially about the whole self-regulation issue. When we talk about like the previous financial crisis, I think we tend to place the blame a lot on the financial institutions and banks, when actually government itself had a big a part in distorting some of the distorting the market itself, and we had a housing bubble that basically crashed thanks to the government.
Now, when it comes to the least able in society, the homeless, the poor, those at the lower ends of economics, is free market a good concept for them? Because doesn't free market mean you are promoting those people who are competitors? And even in one of the worst stereotypes, it's Gordon Gekko from the movie Wall Street. It's dog eat dog and so forth. What do you say when people present that stereotype? When I've been walking around and talking to students at the university, when we talk about free market, many of them actually say that's their idea of free market, and why they justify the need for government to be involved so much.
Well, I mean, the thing is, those students are also the ones who tend to decry capitalism in general.
Bad capitalism,
right? And it's usually, when you take a look at those conversations, all of them see just the very bad things that the free market and capitalist tendencies have for people on the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder. But what really it provides them upward mobility. There's a lot more freedom for them because for, you know, poor people who are ambitious, they have the opportunity to move up. And not only that, there's also, when we're talking about competitive firms, they have the option to hire people from those lower socioeconomic statuses based on not who they're connected to, not how high they are on that ladder, but what they're able to accomplish.
In other words, when businesses that are successful are able to prosper, they need to hire people to have jobs. They ultimately affect the people who are in need, as opposed to a welfare system. So is that your vision of how a free market society empowers those who are greatest in need?
Exactly. Like the more powerful and prosperous the business, the more they hire. But when we have people who are, you know, in the system, like entrenched in it, then they become so reliant on, you know, the system itself that they don't want to get out.
You mean, for example, in welfare systems and dependence upon payments and so forth?
Yes, yes.
And with the disincentive that maybe they won't work in order to have greater benefits? What you're saying is let the economy boom, let businesses grow, and as a result, everybody at every level of the economy succeeds. Your thoughts, Sean?
Yes, certainly. I think a lot of times people tend to think that the economy is just, we have to slice up, you know, pieces from the same pie, when in fact we can actually bake more pies. This is what something that John Stossel talked recently, that we can expand the economy. I mean, if the economy was just essentially, you know, a zero-sum game, we basically be the poorest generation in all of history, considering the population that we have. We're able to expand the economy by allowing people to prosper.
You mentioned John Stossel. Does either of you have a favorite book or favorite video or movie or resource of any kind that you'd recommend to somebody for learning a bit more about free market or liberty ideas and so forth, something that may have influenced you?
I read this book recently. It was a very simple illustrated book. It's called How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes by Peter Schiff. It's kind of like a comic book. It has a lot of cute drawings, but it really does explain how the economy works in a really very simplistic way.
A comic book, it's a great
Yes.
format for busy college students who have enough reading
Yes.
and so forth.
There's
Clarke?
also, I think, The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible by Professor Schooling
Yes.
of HPU.
One of our Grassroots Institute scholars. That's a great book, and how is that an important book for free market education?
Well, from the perspective of a storytelling kind of view, it tells us how important a free market is in order to maintain like the integrity of a people, or for an individual to have their rights just not, basically to have his rights not impugned upon.
Well, that's wonderful, and you know, that's one of the things that impressed me about your group, is that in addition to carrying full loads at the university to get through your degree programs and whatever part-time jobs you all have and so forth, you're learners. You're reading materials. You take advantage of resources. You come out to events at the Grassroots Institute, and you're doing something to go beyond the curriculum at school. And so I commend you, because you're going to be very powerful in the bringing of ideas to society. Last question I have is this: if there's one thing you could change about Hawaii, if you were a governor or a legislature, and so what's one thing you might change about Hawaii? Sean?
Get rid of the Jones Act.
Get rid of the Jones Act. Okay.
Or at least,
Fair.
modify it.
There we go. Go, Clarke.
He stole my idea, but
I'm sorry.
just I would say maybe lift some of the regulations we have on a lot of the smaller businesses, so they have more
Very
room
good.
to flourish.
Well, I want you to know some legislators have been watching, and maybe even the governor. And so those are good ideas coming from educated members of the public. Thank you very much, Clarke and Sean.
Thank you.
My guests today, Sean Mitsui, President of the Young Americans for Liberty at University of Hawaii, Clarke Velasco, the Secretary of the organization, representing a generation of millennials that are taking free market ideas and the idea of liberty into the real world of the working place. Thanks a lot for watching. This is Keli'i Akina, President of the Grassroots Institute, on ThinkTech Hawaii's E Hana Kako. We'll see you again next week, Monday at 2:00 p.m. Aloha.